listen to us. And you guys are here for the 9 takeaways from Duelyst, from tabletop to digital game. And we want to share a lot of our experiences from prototyping it all the way to all the obstacles and challenges that we personally faced, Eric and I, on developing this game from a tabletop prototype all the way to a digital game on Steam. So just to kick things off, have any of you guys played Duelyst? Okay, wow. And how many people here have a tabletop prototype that they're planning to convert or to start to port over to digital? Okay, great. So I'm going to just start off with a little bit of background about ourselves. Eric can start off.
Hi, I'm Eric. I'm the lead game designer of Duelyst, and I'm primarily from the tabletop space. I've designed board games and card games for the last 15 to 17 years. I'm mostly known for living card games for Fantasy Flight. I did a little work for Wizards of the Coast on Magic and Duel Masters. Most people know me for big box board games by this point. I did games like Blood Rage and XCOM and Chaos in the Old World. I'm a huge fan of both Magic and games like Fire Emblem and Final Fantasy Tactics, which makes our meeting very serendipitous because it was really exciting to work on the game.
And I'm Keith Lee. I'm the CEO and creative director of Counterplay Games. I was the former lead producer of Diablo 3 at Blizzard Entertainment, and also the former lead game programmer for the Ratchet & Clank series at Insomniac Games. But more importantly, what's Duelyst? So you guys already know a little bit about Duelyst, but for those who haven't heard about it or played it, it's essentially a collectible tactics game. And it's a way for you to assemble a small army or deck of cards that are actually playable on a 9x5 grid. And it's online. You play 1v1 head-to-head, and it has turn-based battles on there. Currently, we're only on the PC, Mac, and it's playable also on the web, and we have about 250,000 matches that are played per day. The inspiration for this game is the fact that we love Final Fantasy Tactics. We're huge fans of Fire Emblem, but those are primarily single-player experiences where they gate you at a boss or a certain level cap before you can progress. And our curiosity and the question that we wanted to ask was, can we build a competitive tactics style game, but still be able to make it in a very short, to play a match in a very short, reasonable time. So our goal was to build a game that lasted 10 minutes per session or less, and to still keep the breadth of being able to still make it relatively competitive, to have a lot of archetypes and options from aggressive to control or mid-range. And we felt that using a CCG sort of model for us worked really well, because it's very hard to build a competitive game if every character that you have sort of different power levels or things like that. So those are a really great way for us to combine CCG elements that people are familiar with, but to also have positioning and to introduce a lot of new concepts around that. And so this game itself is a 9x5 grid. There's a bunch of minions that you can play on the board. There's also artifacts and spells that create effects on your units, and the object of the game is for you to defeat the enemy general. And we kept the winning objective and the condition really simple. It doesn't require a lot of math or calculations and things like that. And essentially you have a hand at the bottom, which we call an action bar, and you can also replace a unit every single turn. And these are some of the cards that you can collect, and we have 400 plus different minions that you can play on the battlefield, each with their own animations and things like that.
So the game's actually been out also. The game's been out for a year in past open beta, and we're working on our 3rd expansion right now, which will release soon.
So how do we get started, more importantly? This was basically what Duelyst looked like when we first started. And we would be testing and prototyping our units, and we wanted to be able to iterate on visualization of the board state, as well as how we can prototype as quickly as possible. And we had a lot of iterations, and one of the important things is that we tested not only with people who love tabletop games, but people who only play digital games, and we also played with folks that are in the industry and also people that are outside of it. So in the bottom left, these are some folks from Riot Games, Paul Sotosanti and Stephen Lim, and these guys are guys from Riot that play a lot of tabletop. And then there's other folks that have never played tabletop and only play games on Steam. Now, we wanted to also have like a very cheap DIY way to be able to prototype. So for the game that we wanted to build, it was relatively simple. We just bought a ChessX vinyl mat that you just get off of Amazon for probably like less than $30. And the nice thing about those is they have a hex side as well as a square tiles. So depending on the type of game you want to make, it's really easy to prototype. We just get a bunch of polyhedral dice, and typically if you already know what type of attack ranges that you're going to have, or hit points or HP that you're going to have for your units, we did like a D20 dice for the hit points as a tracker and a counter, and then we did like a D8 for like attack or anything that you want to do for defense and things like that. We then also started to print out all the effects and spells and cards that we're going to have in the game, and then we cut them up every day when we iterated and put them into card sleeve protectors so that we can always put it on top of the square for the type of effects and buffs that are occurring for your units. And then we love to get like Pathfinder miniatures because they have a lot of unique heroes. There's you can actually add a little bit of flavor into the prototype if it's a flying unit or a knight, and to kind of create a little bit of a sense. Or if you have a unique hero, then at least they would sort of stand out. But then of course, just to keep things relatively cheap, we also got like a bag of like generic fantasy miniatures that are like a bunch of knights and things like that. So they're viewed as like the pawns of like chess, and you can just get them really cheaply. So there's a lot of repetition here.
So there's a really important design point also why I want to prototype like this as simply and stripped down like this, is that there's a bit of a misconception in tabletop and digital that just because you're designing a digital game, because in the digital space you can make the game really complicated, have a lot of hidden information. We found that isn't true. We wanted to make sure that the game is comprehensive even on tabletop, so that people can really quickly grok what the board state is without having to rely on figuring out what is going on in the back end of the game, because a lot of players assume that that's cheating.
Yeah, and a little side tip too, we like to do a 2x6 on the square tiles because they actually fit the cards that you want to place easily. So if you're moving your characters and units, it's easy for people to remember what tile they're on for your cards, and it's really simple. The other important point too is that although we have a lot of different types of players, you can actually have a pretty small sample size to be able to test your prototype. And the key thing is just making sure you can observe what they're doing and not trying to bias the opinions for how they're playing, and just getting a sense of what areas that they might be confused around, or they might be doing a certain strategy that you've never considered. And we usually just have a log book. So every single time we play, we just track what units they've been using and how they won. And we don't really spend too much time on asking them if they had fun or not, because if they start to look a little distracted and they're starting to lose interest, we know that it's not capturing them anyway, and that's usually like our first sort of gut test for how things are going.
Absolutely, and also because one of the keys to a digital game is how smoothly it plays. One of the reasons we give ourselves limitations of this medium is, of course, we knew that we could fake a lot of the user input on the digital side. We want to make sure that even if we could get this prototype playing fairly smoothly and fairly easily, that putting the extra polish on the digital side would be absolutely top notch.
Mm-hmm. Now, before just even starting with tabletop and moving to digital, we took a step back and started to think about what the strengths are of digital. And I would say 20% of the time before we even started implementation, because it's really easy to roll up your sleeves, get excited to start to code a couple things and try a couple ideas on digital, because it's still really fast to prototype. But we took a step back and we said, hey, what are the strengths on the tabletop side and the weaknesses, and what are the areas on digital that we know that we need to bolster and to continue to support that's very different from tabletop. So the biggest salient thing on the tabletop side, of course, is that you have a very, very custom, highly social experience with friends. And it's very easy to have games where you have secondary expressions and ways that you can bluff and to read signals because people are interacting with you face to face. And of course, the challenge and the weaknesses of tabletop is the fact that it does take time to schedule. You usually need to have a champion or leader to kind of organize things. Generally, it's a larger time commitment to make sure that things work out for that week. Now, you don't have any of those problems on the strengths of digital. You can play randos anytime, anywhere, players across the world. So that's a huge strength from our perspective. But it's also a subtle weakness as well, because you lack that level of personal interaction with the players the people that you're playing with. And of course, it hides a lot of massive number crunching on the digital side. So for the type of game that we built on tabletop, we knew that it's going to work even better on digital because we have lots of interactions and secondary effects that all interact with all of the keywords that we have that actually, if we had now ported it back to tabletop,
That's right.
It would actually be very hard to have this exact Duelyst game because there's so much number crunching that actually occurs on the board state, especially introducing movement and things like that. Now, on the digital side, the area that we wanted to focus on and to bolster is we knew that there was going to be a lack of deeper person-to-person interaction. And there's this sort of mindset that you're looking at a screen, you have the web that you can get onto, there's movies, there's like more distractions for you as you are on digital. So as a result, anything that you can do where the player is ultra engaged, never has this feeling that they have to wait, is utmost critical important versus being on a tabletop night situation.
Right, and you also, a key corollary to that is that in digital, you lose the social contract of the table, right? So, I mean, we've all played digital games. We know what the difference in politeness between a tabletop game and in digital. So we had to make sure when we were designing the game to make, in a tabletop game, when you're not going to rope out every turn, you're not going to grieve people for no reason. You're going to play efficiently, and there's a lot of unsaid communication between players, when to end the turn, et cetera. In this, we had to design the game around that to make sure, around the worst possible type of griefing player and every possible way to make the experience bad for their opponent, we had to assume that the player would.
So I would say that this is a very common graph for anyone that's going to move anything from tabletop to digital, and something just for you to consider. But then it opens up another question. Is a tabletop player similar, and what's the overlap to a digital persona? Does a player that loves tabletop, will they even play Duelyst if it's on digital? So that's a hypothesis. That was a big question. We didn't know that. So we had to just make a couple assumptions and to kind of test out our hypotheses. So our initial, first, most important assumption is people don't want to play 40-minute games and then lose and feel bad on digital. So we wanted to ensure that our play sessions were less than 10 minutes. And then the other difference is that the velocity and the frequency and the volume of games that you're going to play on digital is astronomically, exponentially higher than playing a tabletop game where you might just have one game that night, and most of the variety may not even come from the board or the game itself, but from the interactions that you have that night with the players that are playing with you. So from that perspective, we had to make sure that we increase the priority around creating match variety in every single game. So the goal is that for every new match, you might encounter a different general, or you might encounter a different deck or a different set of minions when you play against other players, so that things don't feel as samey. And this is, of course, the #1 challenge for building a game like ours is how to make the people who grind through 50 games a day to still have them enjoy themselves, and for the folks who might only play a few games in a day. And again, the hypothesis for us is that we had to make sure that you're playing with anonymous players and how we can alleviate any of the negatives around that. So on the data side, we also track, Peter Drucker has always said that what's measured is improved. And so we took that hypothesis and then we started to test it out on the web first. So we actually didn't push out our game on the PC at first. We wrote our entire engine in JavaScript and then kind of put it out on the web. And the main reason why, and why people always ask us this question is like, why'd you guys do that? It's because it's very easy for us to deploy a new build, to change the balance of things, to push it out, and it's very easy for a user or a new player to get into the game without going through a lot of hoops and to log in and do all these type of things. And we started to track very early on what the average play time was for the players, what the actual match times were, and so when we started to tune our cards, when we started to tune all of our systems, our number one goal is to make sure that the match time didn't increase over 10 minutes. And so originally it started at around 15.
That's right, yep.
Yeah. So once again, we haven't even started talking about the takeaways yet, but just really wanted to set the design pillars that we had started with at the prototype stage. Again, to enforce a match time, upper bound to 10 minutes. And that's already, we feel, at the highest for the type of game that we have, especially if you want to potentially move your game onto mobile as well. And then number two, we wanted to offer a wide variety of deck archetypes. And then third, we wanted to find ways that we can build player confidence in the game and also to allow them to see that they're improving in terms of their skill level. And then lastly, we also started to predict and started to think about how we also wanted to build our ranked player distribution. So early on, we knew that it wasn't going to be a Gaussian normal distribution bell curve. We instead knew that we wanted to skew the curve towards time served and the amount of time that you were playing, and to skew it slightly towards like a lower level. So this is actually the results of where our ladder stands in the last few months. And you'll notice that the distribution of these 5 different divisions, and just to give you guys a little background, if you guys haven't played ranked, is that every month it resets, and as you continue to play, you will progress up the ladder if you win, but at the lower levels, you just have to play to be able to go up. And then we actually have a floor on every single division. So what this does is alleviate sort of laddering stress, because once you hit a certain division, you can start to experiment a bit and play around with different decks that you want to try out without losing rank. So this is the distribution. We share this with our community because a lot of times people think, hey, I'm not doing well in this game because I'm not silver or gold or even diamond or S rank. But being able to show this to the community also helps people realize that it's not just about being in bronze, because a lot of people spend literally hundreds of hours playing our game and playing like 100 matches a day to get to S rank. So, all right, so we're going to start with the first takeaway that we learned with Duelyst. And the first one that is different from Tabletop is we focused a lot on real-time interactivity. So what we mean by that is everything that we did in the game when it's your opponent's turn, everything from mouse movements to what they hover over, to what they're looking at, to them dragging a card to display what they're doing, is all done in real time. So we have a real-time system to track everything, and you can actually see what your opponent is doing. So that way, you still have this feeling that you're playing against a real human opponent, that they're looking at things and doing stuff, rather than waiting for like a minute or 90 seconds and there's like nothing happening on the screen and you're just off to get a coffee or something. So we want people to still feel like they're engaged on the opposite end's turn. And
on a deeper level, actually, this is one of the, I'm a hardcore CCG player, and one of the things I wanted to make sure that we did here was that in tabletop games, you can read cues, especially when you're bluffing any game with hidden information like we have. You can read cues from players from body language, watching what they're looking at, and you can also double bluff people by giving off false tells. In this game, if you're high level and you're familiar with the cards, you can actually watch what people are looking at. You can watch how long it takes somebody to play a card at a particular time. You can watch what they're pointing at, what they're not, to see and start to formulate some hypothesis. And it gives you, it's inches, gives you a tiny little incremental advantage, but that's important in games like this where you're improving tiny, tiny percentages at a time.
Mm-hmm. So the high-level idea for anything outside of even the real-time interactivity, the summary is just to think about ways that you can engage your player when they're not actively doing something in the game and they're just like waiting or pausing. So here's actually a video just to show you of the enemy's turn here. So on the left side would be me, let's say, and your opponent now is actually hovering, looking over some units, looking at these 2 units that you have, and they're going to deploy things. So this is all done in real time, a real-time system in the back end to be able to track this and to track all your mouse movements and everything like that.
And he's animated right now, which means he's in the middle of, he was clicking on a card in his hand and looking at, and thinking about playing it.
Yeah. And of course, this is an example also of, besides just doing mouse interactions, you can also do emotes and other like soft ways to communicate with each other so that you feel that there's another person that you're playing with, but still in a kind of controlled way. Just to kind of dig a little deeper, we also offer a restricted level of player-to-player interaction. So as you've seen, emotes, and the cool thing is that once you start playing a lot of Duelyst, it becomes like an expressive language. There's like a language in itself for how people start to communicate with each other in the game based on the dozens and dozens of emotes that we sort of have. And that's like kind of a cool language that people start to learn. We have a buddy list where if you add and mutually agree to add with each other, you can now start to chat. And we also have replay sharing within the buddy list. So I can actually share a replay that I've just done to show off like a really cool lethal that I did. And we also, outside of like the game itself, we have on our main menu a watch section. So the idea here is that if you're not playing a game, you can actually go into any division ladder and start to see some of the more interesting popular games. And we have an algorithm for pushing out kind of unique sort of games that are happening. You can watch on any side, and then you can sort of see what people are doing. So this is a fun way for players to just relax, kind of watch what people are doing, learn some new strategies, or kind of see like what other people are doing in a very safe kind of environment, especially if people are just starting to learn to ladder and to jump into the game. And of course, we also have a spectate mode. So you can hop into any sort of a Twitch featured person that we have. And one of the things that we did was we actually integrated Twitch into our PC game. So we highlight Twitch streamers that are playing Duelyst, and it's a benefit for them because they get players that are just hopping in, and we also let them to jump right into Twitch and to watch it. And of course, you can actually spectate your friends, and this is actually really important anyway because it's a requirement if you plan to do competitive tournaments and to be able to have a spectating sort of system so that tournament organizers can start to display different sides and things like that. So this is a real-time interactivity. These are some of the emotes and things
We
like
spent
that.
a long time on these, by the way. I think we must have spent at least a week in just design and to figure out, because we didn't have infinite emotes, and the key, I remember the key discussion we had, we wanted to make sure that the language was 100% emergent. So we wanted to pick some of the most common expressions that people would use that didn't necessarily point to an exact word or an exact adjective, and allow people to use them individually or in strings in succession to communicate with each other. And the meaning behind it, like it created a really cool secondary talking point across the internet, across our forums and Reddit and stuff. It was pretty cool.
Okay, I'm still on takeaway number 1. So the other thing too is, it's really important is, again, people are impatient, people don't want to wait. So anything you can do to shorten the matchmaking queue times, ultimately, if you can do it less than 20 seconds, especially on the lower ranks, is pretty critical. So I played a lot of Warcraft 3, shows kind of like my age on this, but tons of Warcraft 3, and you have the roving eye, and you have like a sort of a timer that displays like how long you've been waiting. Those all help because anything where it looks like the screen just froze and you don't have anything to show will concern people. So we always have like a timer that displays, and there's some level of interaction. People that you're in a matchmaking queue, and we really try to make sure that we can get below 20 seconds. And sometimes that means that early on, when you're first like pushing out your game on digital, you may not have a lot of players jumping in right away. And so it's very, like, all your fans are gonna always ask to add like all these different modes that they want. And we all want to do that. That's like the things that we love doing. We wanna have rainbow mode. We wanna have casual and all these other things. But to have that, you need to have literally 200, 300,000 matches happening a day before you can even get close to hitting like a less than 20-second interval time. So for us, we started very simply with a ranked ladder, and then also we had a draft mode, which we called the Gauntlet. So we didn't release casual mode at the start, and I can talk a little bit more about casual later. And only now, for the next expansion that's coming in a few weeks, are we adding this rainbow mode system where you can actually mix and match every single card from every faction for the first time. So that's going to be a lot of fun for people, we hope.
For those of you guys who play, it's even more fun than you think it is.
Then starting with takeaway number 2, so one thing we learned is that you're really only as good as your matchmaking systems. So on a high level, how we kind of built our algorithm was we thought of a bunch of different metrics that we wanted to track, and then we put a weighted parameter on each of these metrics. And then later on, once we did that, we reduced it into a normalized range and created a rating score. And then that way, it was very easy for us to compare in real time how to matchmake different people. So some of the metrics that we used, or the most salient ones, is rank radius. So what we mean by that is we would start out matching people that are both ranked 24, let's say, and if that didn't coincide, then we would actually expand the radius on that. So you would start to match someone that's 23 and 24, and we would start to expand that out. And that would actually have its own metric that would get normalized into a weighted system. We also have a time served. So what we mean by that is that we look at every player's profile, and we look at how much time they've actually invested into Duelyst. And we also track as a proxy, it's a high correlation. We also look at their win counts and how well they've sort of performed internally. And then we give priority to people who've been waiting for longer amount of time. So then we start to actually expand that, put a higher weight on this, and that's the queue wait time. So we feel like people have been waiting for more than 20 seconds. We'll actually give in and make sure that they can jump onto a game, even if it's not the ideal match. And the number one thing that we wanted to avoid at all costs, and people have different opinions on this, so other people are totally fine not putting this into the system, but for us, we felt that it never felt good to be able to to play the same player again on the next matchmaking, when you're matched, because the loser is gonna feel super frustrated because they're gonna ask, like, why am I getting matched up with the same guy that just beat me? So I think that we view as a kind of a bad thing. And then more recently, we started to think about, once you get to over 200 to 300,000 matches a day, you can start to do this thing called cohort-based matchmaking. So what we can now do is take a tranche of players that came in a certain season as a cohort and then match them all together. So what this helps us do is it actually is a way to alleviate, it actually solves all of these sort of problems, because it's almost like everyone's in the same generation or wave or class, and they're all starting to learn and kind of grow their decks, and it solves a lot of the kind of issues for us. So cohort-based thing is something new that we started to implement that has worked nicely for us.
It solves a really good problem also with what you were talking about with deck size and collection, right? One of the invisible issues with a lot of matchmaking games is, especially with people with asymmetric power levels, is a new player, power doesn't necessarily equal rarity in this game, but it can feel like that to some players. Somebody doesn't want to come up against somebody at the same rank that has like 50 legendary cards in their deck. So this helps almost by itself alleviate that.
Yeah. Now, again, Peter Drucker said, what gets measured gets improved. So specifically around matchmaking, we also built a system where we actually graded ourselves at any moment in time as a snapshot throughout the day. And we had a rating system based on those parameters. A 1.0 perfect, 0.75, 0.5, and 0 would be, for example, the same player played twice in a row. And the important thing with this metric is that we did a system for every single division. So you need to have a granular enough matchmaking system to be able to track your performance across every division. Because in some cases, your bronze matchmaking might be at close to 1.0, but then something's happening on silver and gold, and those matches aren't really working. So here's an example. So we actually have a real-time graph that all of us have on the screen at our office to be able to track matchmaking quality. So at any moment in time during the day, we can see how things are performing, if things are above, at what division these numbers are hitting a good number. So if it's over 0.5, I think we're relatively happy. And the nice thing with this too is that if we put in a balance change or we tune something, we can already, or we change like how our algorithm does stuff for the matchmaking, this helps a lot. This doesn't ever explain why your matchmaking is going down, but at least it's a good early indicator that something is wrong and that you can actually think about how to solve it. So we don't have this, you're just guessing at that point if matchmaking is good, because hearing stuff from the community is always helpful, but at the same time, you're gonna get so much noise coming in from the community. People will always complain that your matchmaking sucks. So you need to have your own system to be able to at least have a way to measure that yourself and internally understand how you can improve that.
And sometimes people actually wonder when we're doing balance changes and tweaks, like why we'll address a particular issue that wasn't necessarily called out by the community. It's usually because we have, this is one of our starting points, and if it does hurt matchmaking at some level, we consider that as important as any other balance metric.
So the third takeaway that we thought about was realizing how can we extract fun and progression for people that are still losing matches. So no matter what, it's a zero-sum game. Someone's going to lose, and how can we offer the most fun for people that continue to lose matches? So one of the differences with Tabletop is you can walk away finishing that night, ending a session, and even if you lose, you still had some fun in some way because you're interacting with your friends, you had some sort of social capital. So what we did on the quest side is to think about how we can offer play quests that you can complete and get rewards for that, and also win-based quests. So there's a delicate balance because, again, if you only do play-style quests to accomplish your quests in the game, you're going to have a lot of people starting to concede in your matches for PvP. And so you'll have to always develop a system for penalties and an algorithm for detecting when a player is conceding. And that's one of the things that you have to twist a lot and change a lot, because you can't ever let anyone know how you're detecting that people are conceding. So 1 week we might track how many turns that they're playing before they start to exit. So we always change how we detect the conceding algorithm. And it's a lot of work. But if you do want to avoid the exploit of players constantly conceding, that's something that has to get built, and a lot of people don't think about that, and it's just one factor to think about as you develop your game for digital that isn't something that's common on Tabletop. And then faction progression. So the idea for us is for every faction, we don't just give you a big starter bundle with 30 to 50 cards and you get overwhelmed with how to even start. So we always have a couple marquee cards so that as you continue to play your faction, you start to get introduced to new cards, and we make them really clear with a single ability, very few words on the card text, and typically it's very obvious to the player that this card has a win condition, that this is something I can use to start playing and to win. So that's, from our perspective, what we kind of built. And this progression allows people to feel that they're learning the game, that they can sort of win in the lower ranks, that they could play well on practice. and also have this feeling of getting more cool new cards and getting excited about how they can change different cards and start to develop and master their deck or their faction. And what we also do too is that if you start to lose a lot of games, we actually have achievements and things like that where at certain specific points of play behavior, we'll give you orbs because we want to make sure that the people who aren't succeeding in the game can still have ways for them to find, get new cards and still feel like they can progress, even if they're losing a certain number of games. So that's a really good way to kind of bolster that format.
Just to be clear, for those who don't play, orbs are the packs that contain new cards. I remember we tuned that a couple of times, didn't we? How many games it would take to lose to get
yeah, because again, people will concede and try to get those orbs, and that's a natural thing, but that's okay. That's a natural thing, so it's a balance on what you're going to do. So here are just some examples where we front load a lot of the rewards for players that may not be winning or they're not grinding 50 games a day. So we'll have win a practice game, which is relatively easy because you're playing against an AI. So that's a win condition game. But then we have a welcome back quest where people feel like they can still play a few games and get some gold early on and kind of warm up if they haven't played Duelyst in a while. We also have a first win of the day to motivate people to just keep playing until they can win their first game and to build that sort of confidence and still front load some gold. And then we also still have typical play quests.
So just to talk about that for a real quick sec, there was the quest. There's a real delicate balance between how we chose what quests were win quests and what quests were play quests. For the most part, we wanted people, when you log into the game, especially if you're a new player, you log in, and this is inviting. This tells you, you just need to play X number of games. The first win of the day was actually hidden. We didn't show that. We didn't show it anywhere on the HUD, but of course the first time you win a game, you're like, oh, I win, first win of the day, which does motivate you to win. We didn't only want players to make it feel like a Facebook game, you just log in and play. We wanted them to feel driven to win. So you will get something even if you lose over and over again, but the first time you win, you will get that adrenaline rush and get your cool packs.
Yeah. And you can talk a little bit more about the in-match stuff too.
Right. So what we were talking about before, the extracting fun from losses was that was in the meta game. Right. In the game itself, we want to make sure Duelyst is it's a high skill game. It's higher skill than some of our competitors are, but which is daunting. Right. Sometimes people are going to lose by not know why. So we put a lot of subtle elements to the design, which is taken from my trading card game background. So in a match, we built the game around milestones. So even though there's one clear winner, one clear loser, we want to make sure that there were things that people could accomplish inside a match, whether or not they won or lost. So most of the game, for those of you who play, of course, many of the cards are very combo oriented. They're simple, but there's some clear synergies in cards and there's some subtle synergies in other cards. If the game is highly consistent, so if you can, if you're playing the Vitruvian faction, you want to build the deck that lets you build lots of obelisks and generate tons of little guys. You might lose, but at least you got the cool feeling of having built that board state. And learning moments. Of course, the game is relatively high skill and highly interactive. The positioning on the board means that cards have different value based on where they are in relation to your opponent's pieces. So even if the takeaway you'll get from a game very often is very clear, like, oh, if I only had played my minion behind my general instead of in front of the general, I actually would have won because he wouldn't have been able to attack by X. So that was. None of these are explicitly out there, but people do they will get the feeling, they will learn quickly from game to game.
We also push really hard for being able to have replays very early on in our game cycle. So you, as a player, you can just hop into your profile and look at an entire history of the last set of games that you've played, and you can start to watch and kind of see like what you potentially did and observe how you've performed and see if there's potentially like a few mistakes that you had made and how, for example, you might have lost lethal or things like that. So I feel that it's a evergreen learning platform to have replays in the game, And although it took a lot of time for us to build because you want to fast forward and scrub and do a lot of different things like that, it's worthwhile because people will go back into the game and be able to learn from their mistakes, which for a game like ours is challenging because sometimes you just don't know why you lost. And that's the hardest part of trying to explain things in our game is you may not know because something you could have done like might have been even like 2 turns before. So this is like a thing to kind of alleviate that too. So takeaway number 4 is we focus on a lot of systems too that can encourage positive behavior. So we had this idea of player gifting, so of course that's more standard with a lot of other games, but we really wanted to make sure that the rewards that you are giving to your friend was pretty significant and very high, and you can still rate limit that like per, so if that's an issue you can always rate limit it in some way, but you really feel like that the recipient is getting a really good reward from that, and I think that's really important. And also we had a kind of an interesting system that we haven't seen in other games really, where the winners can also tip their opponent after the game. And the idea for us of doing that was we felt that let's try to distribute gold and currency as far across the ecosystem, and people actually really like tipping and kind of as a way to kind of help another person that may not have some of the cards or things like that. And we also had a top 50 tipping leaderboard so that people had an alternative vector to progress in the game just by tipping some of their other opponents rather than trying to gruel through necessarily like S rank and things like that. And then we would display that on Twitter or like our Facebook and things like that, and we also send them custom physical rewards that are unique from like in-game rewards, so we actually mail them out to some of the winners and things like that as a cool little prize.
It was actually, besides this, the tipping leaderboard being super cool, it was also important that we made sure that we never made any explicit reason for tipping. It was entirely up to the players why you would tip, so that they'd make their decisions based on social norms rather than anything else, rather than something they would try to exploit. That's very important. It actually dates back, that's a tabletop style mechanic. If any of you guys played old Games Workshop games back in the day, Warhammer and stuff, they had a sportsmanship award that you would that was awarded by the group, by the players of the tournament, to the player who made the game most fun for their opponent.
So from a design and systems perspective, when we're building Duelyst, it's really easy to start to look at achievement systems and then faction progression systems and the first time user experience and think about, okay, we're starting to see an issue with how our players' behavior is operating, so let's try to add this quest in here to fix things and stuff like that. And that's going to be a problem because you're going to start to have these kitchen sink sort of systems that don't really solve anything at all, and they're trying to plug like little holes that are starting to appear. And then the problem later too is that some of your later designers or people that start to join your team have no understanding like why you built this particular system and what problem it was even trying to solve in the first place. So for all of the system that we develop, we very clearly delineate what the goal of that particular system is trying to achieve on the game design side, and if it does not fit that goal for anything we want to plug in, we decide whether to remove a system or to develop another system that accomplishes that goal rather than trying to mix too much stuff into a single system. So for example, achievements were very different from other systems like quests because the purpose of achievements was to give you a ding and like an achievement at a very specific point that we're tracking to reinforce a particular play pattern. So for example, if you're losing a lot in a row, we actually give you a particular reward. The first time you ever disenchant a card, you get an achievement, and also it gives you enough spirit to be able to then craft a new card. So we're reinforcing that you can now actually build something from something you disenchanted rather than just getting all the spirit and not knowing what to do with it. The first time user experience, the FTUE, we made sure that we didn't really focus too much on the meta systems and how those work, but the goal of the first time user experience was just to focus on the in-match gameplay and the sort of dynamics of how you're playing day to day, like in practice. And then faction progression, again, is to solve the issue that we want to do around starter bundles and packs, and how we can slowly teach the player like new concepts in a way that we felt like was the best possible path for them to learn a faction as quickly as possible. Because again, like an LCG model or other things that do work on tabletop it's not a necessity for doing something on digital. And I think a lot of our community folks say, hey, why don't you do a LCG thing? Well, we don't really have to do that. I think that's actually almost a result of like the practicality of having to print stuff on tabletop. From our perspective, giving someone a starter bundle is challenging because we don't know how to value that. The players don't know how to value a starter bundle yet. They're super overwhelmed. So being able to actually show new cards in a nice sort of progressive way has worked better for us, even though I think most people do want to do starter bundles. I think that's a very common decision. So it's just something to consider. I think every game is different, but that's the sort of philosophy and the thinking that we took.
Absolutely. When we were doing design and tech work very closely together, and when we were working on systems design, one of the litmus tests we would always give ourselves is we would run a simulation of first-time user experience, like virtually, write it down on paper or figure it out on the graph, and then plug that system in and make sure that it is as seamless as possible for the first-time user. It's one of the biggest traps of feature-based design like this is it is really easy to lose sight of what the first-time user experience is. Once all of us have our own accounts, it is time-consuming to keep starting new accounts and run through that experience again. So, but we have to keep cognizant of it because these games live or die by acquisition.
Okay, I'm going to zoom through a little bit faster. So even besides doing some of the stuff around systems, like our progression vector, even around like our goals for like how we design cards had the same idea, had to fit like one goal. So everything from our goal for text was avoid hyperliteral text. So we started as the premise, and we said, hey, we just got to lower word card count because our stuff's getting like way too wordy. And we try to aim for like a budget of 30 characters per line, a hard max of like 4 lines, single card abilities, especially early on, and just kind of move discoverables into a different area so people can kind of start to discover cards. So here's like an example of a very typical day-to-day card for the original idea for the Kara, which is a general Bloodborne spell. And we started with whenever you summon a minion from anywhere this turn, give it +1/+1. It's very technical, it's very accurate. It also represents how tokens work in the game. But now you have to spend all this time to read it, and most people won't really know the difference. And the bottom version is cut almost in half, and it's just generally more clear and accomplishes 80% of the objective of what we wanted to say.
I know some players do complain that our text isn't as precise enough, but aggregate complexity is a real thing. You can never judge a card in a vacuum. You have to judge it as part of a 6-card hand. So every time you add a word onto a card, you have to multiply that by 6 theoretically, and that aggregate complexity can turn off new players so fast that. Like, again, kills our acquisition.
And we still challenge with this all the time. It's a very tough one. So for takeaway number 6, again, not everyone can catch up to hardcore players. They may spend more time playing the game. Some people just are better with positioning. They might have a better collection through time. And originally, we offered a discrete number of wins, and you get certain like Y gold. But again, this makes people the stronger, richer, and it makes you can create like essentially a death spiral where the bottom 10% of your community just quits just because they don't think they're good at the game or they're losing a lot, and then now the next 10th percentile will leave, and then all you get are these super hardcore, high skill, super elite players that can play like 50 games a day. So what we did was think a lot about how to do catch-up mechanics on digital. So we had welcome back quests, which we talked about, and this one is a very interesting example. So the first original idea for doing a catch-up mechanic was, hey, we're going to offer you 10 gold for every 4 ranked place. So, and we have a cap of 50 gold, but we started to see people progressively starting to concede 20 games on ladder. This is like what they did. They log in, just lose 20 games. And they figured out like how long they had to play and just estimate and optimize their gold time. So what we ended up doing is then switching it to 5 gold per 2 wins. And what that means is that per completion, you get +10 extra gold for a completion. So that means that in the first 14 wins per day, you're essentially getting 15 gold per 2 wins, and it tapers off at 14. So the nice thing is that it allows players to start to mentally think that I'm kind of losing extra gold if I don't play more, but in a way that reinforces them to play and to win, and it's a positive. It's almost like the original like WoW rest XP system, where instead of punishing you, it just said, hey, you got some extra XP that you can get just by like playing a bit more or killing a few more mobs that day. So that's actually a very similar psychological system that we did. It's all positive reinforcement. But then what this also solved too is that for people who wanted to grind and continue to play and play 100 games a day, they can still continue to earn gold, because in the previous version, we capped it at like a max of 50. So this pleases both sides of the player base.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, in the Catchup Mechanics, that's what for out-of-game systems. Inside the game, we use, again, a lot of standard CCG designs here. So the mana ramps up every turn, so the amount of stuff you can do, the power level of your plays increase every turn, so people who get an early advantage could be defeated by somebody with who has weights on more powerful stuff. That's pretty standard. The stakes elevate from turn to turn. So we have in the game, we have mana springs that allow people to get temporary mana for running into the middle of the board and interacting with their opponent. Even somebody who gets it that first will burn through more cards, which the other player may decide to hold on and get card advantage by killing more of their stuff. And we have something called strong board clears. Players who, games like this often boil down to how much tempo can I get, how many threats can I put on the board as quickly as possible that my opponent cannot react to. We decide to increase the strength of the cards that can wipe out multiple threats at once. So again, to give an advantage to somebody who is lagging behind, or allow people to play defensively in a control style. Wait for your opponent to overcommit and just stabilize, don't die, and then finish them up. Play a board clear and then win the game with your more powerful stuff.
And be aware, of course, every design decision has trade-offs. So philosophically, we decided to do that, and we stuck with that decision. There's also obvious negatives for having strong board clears and having a lot of options for removal, and that's an issue that the community will talk about as well. But it's something that we stuck to on a top-down level to kind of maintain like fidelity of the game and the board. Now, number 7, what's different from tabletop compared to digital is also consistency in being able to release patches and having sort of like this military unit basically on your team that can continue to push out content. So as mentioned before, we originally launched on the web, and one of the huge benefits for doing stuff on the web is that we can deploy things very quickly without people having to get updates, and very quickly just start to tune things behind the scenes, especially like early on. Then once we knew that we had a pretty consistent game, we had like the amount of time that we wanted, then we can like push out onto PC. But our cadence is pretty much close to two patches a month, and we did 55 patches in 1 year. So we're very focused on having a plan for what we want to push out, and we think about the type of content that we want to do in terms of live events is split into 3 areas: daily, as well as weekly, and then also for monthly. So the monthly stuff would be like ranked ladder, and we have an inverse reward system. So for example, we front load the best rewards actually at a lower rank, and as you continue to go up, the rewards are actually a little bit less awesome than the ones at the bottom. So the bulk of people will get the coolest cards like that month. And rather than the richer getting stronger by being more skilled and getting better stuff. We have boss battles that we introduced that you can play against the AI every week with completely different types of decks. We have daily challenges. And you know, our game is like primarily PvP, but we spend a lot of time also thinking about training challenges and single player challenges that people can start to experiment with so that they can build confidence before you jump into ladder. And so these are some of the cards that we release every month that are different and kind of change things up in terms of meta. Now, takeaway number 8 is creating a social community atmosphere, which on tabletop, everyone does too, but especially on digital, there's a lot of different cool ways that we did things. We split it into like 3 distinct areas. We use Discord for like real-time interaction that is like short-lived, ephemeral. And then Reddit was something that people might check daily And the content there are the folks that would check once a day and things like that. And there's like some good content that you can kind of see there that was happening. And then we also have, we run our own forums, and those are designed for long form where people can spend time to write long articles and essays and like deck types and all that sort of thing. We have a customer support system where we actually have a 24-hour grading system. So we look at how fast and how quickly and what the quality is for all the different requests that we get and tickets that we get. And our goal is to always get like 0 tickets like every day. And that's one of the key things that we strive to do. And so just to give you kind of a benchmark, our number of Twitter followers is about 18K, Facebook is like 35,000 likes. And our view right now at this point in time is that Twitter is still a very powerful mechanism to communicate like patches and ideas and new cards and things like that, because the challenge right now on Facebook is that 1% of your Facebook posts reach your audience, even less than that, even if they like your product or like your page. Anything you post up there just doesn't get to anyone anymore. Okay. And again, we integrated featured streamers directly in game so that people can also start to, if they're not sure how to play the game, they can click, immediately jump onto watch a game that's on Twitch, and also to find someone that's there, and also perhaps even interact with the player and kind of learn some things. And we also run a lot of dev talks where different parts of our community can talk about an upcoming boss or like how we sort of designed it or things that you can kind of think about. Number 9 is, unfortunately, you just can't make everyone happy in digital, and nope. It's really tough, and a lot of the decisions that we make isn't a majority sort of thing where all the players, like 80% will make a decision. Generally, it will polarize very evenly on a certain decision. So if you query a large group of players, it would always polarize into like 2 different areas for like what they believe is a good design, and they're both all valid. I think that a lot of these decisions are feedback that we get. So we just stick true to our original philosophy, and we try to have some pillars that we do in terms of our planning for the next expansions. And our goal is just to bolster the strengths that we have. Rather than trying to plug all the weaknesses necessarily in our game, we just move forward, try to build the things that we know that we're strong at, like having a game that lasts for less than 10 minutes, building like a really cool set of archetypes, exciting win conditions, and things like that to do it. And there's just no way you can build, quote unquote, like a perfect game. And I'll give you a couple examples, is that we had originally like 2-card draw, where you could draw like 2 cards, and we changed it to a single draw. That really polarized and in some ways pissed off the community. But there were a lot of reasons why we needed to do that. A lot of times we might have the keyword random in our card, and a lot of that stuff is to fix like variety and also to smooth out parts of the skill curve. But again, the folks that are playing a lot and they love deterministic, like highly skilled like games are going to get frustrated. So but there's a balance, and we just decided, hey, we're not going to be, have a little bit more, we're having more RNG than chess or Go, but we're going to have less RNG than another typical like CCG that's out there or any of our competitors, and we just kind of stuck with that position. So
we might want to do questions soon.
Yeah, so this is again the summary. The bottom right quadrant is the area to start thinking about in terms of how to improve those areas. I think this will always benefit for high frequency for the game, and that's pretty much it from. So thanks so much.
I think we have a couple of minutes for questions.
Yeah, we'd love to answer any questions you guys have.
Here they come.
Hi, thanks for a great talk.
Thank you.
I've been wondering recently, with board games being so huge, we've seen some successful ports of board games into digital, but it seems like aside from CCGs, there haven't been a lot of like natively digital games that borrow board game mechanics or feel like board games. We haven't seen a lot of digital deck builders or worker placement games, for instance. Is that something you guys think there's potential for, or is it just like nature of the medium that it doesn't work?
Well, if you mean why we think there aren't any more natively digital board game-esque type games, is because of the strengths of the medium, right? Once you build a digital game natively digital, then we're clearly going to be playing to the strengths of the medium, and there's always going to be a point. There's always where you have to choose. We have to choose: is this a digital game with all with the strengths that Keith was talking about, or are we going to try to make it a little bit more real-time kitchen table style game? So I mean, there will at best there'll probably be more hybrid style games, or games that are adapted from board games in order to teach board games a little bit easier.
Thank you.
Okay.
Given the process that you guys, or given the amount of time you spent and invested in, going from the prototype to digital, and now you guys I know are thinking about mobile or at least tablet or phone. I don't know. How are you kind of looking at those challenges? So going from desktop to mobile.
What are the biggest challenges from desktop to mobile?
Yeah.
The biggest challenge from desktop to mobile is screen space, screen size, and text size. So text size was the hardest thing for us to adjust for, and that's really actually the biggest one was text size. And also the UI and how to frame some things. So if you guys have already tried out our beta for the mobile, it's going to be, there's certain things that we had to remove out of the game on mobile so that we can accommodate that sort of space.
Cool.
Hi, I wanted to actually ask 2 questions if I could. So the first one is just for your matchmaking. As a player progresses and starts playing and they get better, they also start playing better players. Do you feel that they're still getting a rewarding experience even though their win rate might not be increasing, but they're getting better?
Well, every player is going to cap out at one particular division based on their ranking. That's one of the main reasons why we have floors in our ranking system. What we generally find the behavior is, once a player hits their skill cap and starts going down to the floor of their rank, that's where, because you can't go down, generally speaking, more players tend to experiment more with decks, and they play more fun decks or more experimental stuff, and the chances of that player winning against those decks goes up quite substantially. So they will end up with a bit of a roller coaster, but our seasons being 1 month and resetting tends to solve a lot of that.
Okay. Can I actually ask one more quick question related to that same issue? How much do you value quality of decks in matchmaking, or does that just over time become a component of their skill if they keep playing the same deck long enough?
Do you mean quality of decks by how
well it's put together?
We don't track, for example, what number of legendaries or the rarity of the cards when you hop into a match. I think what the cohort-based matchmaking does is it helps us solve a lot of those sort of issues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. So you went through lessons learned. I'm wondering if you actually had any of these design pillars in the beginning, or are the lessons learned, and how late in the process did you learn them?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
So the design pillars were pretty early on. So when we were already developing the prototype and thinking about transitioning to digital, those were the first thoughts, making the game less than 10 minutes. That was definitely at the start, how we built the first set of 60 cards to test out. So the first 60 cards helped to accomplish that the matches would last less than 10 minutes. Although at that time, of course, you had very clear hard counters and things like that because of the limited card size. And then the other goal is how we can accommodate players that were losing. I think those were all things that we planned pretty early on in the game. One other thing that's a little bit more on the technical side is that we knew that we might move to the mobile or to have the opportunity to expand there. And that's why we did pixel art, why we did 2D style art, because we knew that potentially we would have limited bandwidth, texture space, things like that. We wanted to have an app that you could download, have a small binary and things like that. So those were more technical things that we planned out very early on, because a lot of people ask, why isn't your game all in 3D? But the reality is having 400 units all 3D animated on a board is pretty challenging, and it could actually be pretty high effort for doing that.
And they look so cool on your iPhone.
It does look pretty good, the pixel art now. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
You talked a little bit about the challenge of making sure that people have a really good experience with matchmaking online. And I'm curious about doing that when you have a premium game and you're trying to build out the community, how you might approach something like that. Making sure you have enough players there when you first launch so that all your new players aren't coming on and then finding they can't play online because no one's there.
Premium games, a paid game?
Yeah, like a paid online multiplayer game.
That's a tough one.
A lot of the digital board games are paid online multiplayer.
It's true. Like, I mean, with a premium game, you've got a hard gate already of how many players you're going to get. Our game was, because it's a free to play, we knew we were going to have a huge cohort of players to start with. I mean, compared to a tabletop game. So we made our ranking system, our rank ladder, very granular. The best way I could think of them to start with, you would have to make a very non-granular ranking ladder and just allow for a little bit more, a little more give in in the fidelity of matchmaking, for sake of time, because I think the time between matchmaking is your #1 consideration, because that's what makes your game feel active and alive.
And also one thing is that casual queue seems like just another thing to do, but it's, in our opinion, really hard to build a casual matchmaking system, because the mindset is, oh, it's casual, but everyone still wants to win in that queue. So as a result, even if you lose, it feels bad, and then also you have people with insane skill level that can jump in there, and then you also have players that want to experiment with decks. It's really hard to find a quality match for everyone because everyone's goals are so different on casual. So although people say, hey, I want to practice on that and not have like ladder stress, actually, they don't feel that great going on a casual unless you spend a lot of time building that system. So if you're thinking of maybe building a lot of modes, I still think that having a very simple ranked progression system that can reset, that's PvP, have a single queue, is probably better, because casual is like very hard to build, you think?
Absolutely.
Hey, my question is primarily for Eric. How do you go about balancing your responsibilities on Duelyst with whatever responsibilities you may have on your more traditional tabletop games you're working on simultaneously?
Oh, well, I mean, I've got an amazing team. So I'm not like the only designer. We have a team. We have a full team of 5 designers that work as a group. So my role at Duelyst is it was the design of the core game and the full alpha beta set. But during that time, we've been training our team of really, really talented people in the Duelyst design style, and they all have they've all got separate talents and perspective as well. So my job is more of at this point is as a vision keeper. So I'm the one who will lay out the foundation for the set, why the set is fun, what cool mechanics are we going to explore. But this is a point where it's so collaborative that there's 4 of us in any one given set. So even as my exact participation rises and falls in the exact card design, you probably won't even notice a difference, I don't think.
And there'd be some cards in our previous expansion where designers just can learn best from the mistakes. So there's some cards that some of our other designers had pushed out that didn't work out very well. And then also we have a very specific top level S-rank competitive balancer that's really top ranked and is always like rank 0 like every month. Who really understands what's happening in the game.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like the worst player on our team.
So, hey, thanks guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time.